Well, just having listened to the Minister, I think you have a wonderful imagination. Will you think of a future career perhaps as a screenwriter or a novelist? Because just listening to you, you seem to be imagining a world that we simply cannot see, that absolutely doesn't exist. A world where the landlord class is facilitating the housing of our people. The reality is that every weekend, I'm sure like yourself can, we meet lots of distressed families and distressed individuals who have been made homeless simply by people who wanted to gouge the highest possible rent out of people. That's the reality, and which you know is, in fact, it's reality. If you don't know it's reality, as I said, you have a wonderful imagination. You have a different career than, I think, in administering a housing department, because it is what's happened with rents that's led to the desperate crisis which we have. And, I think yesterday you passed, and the government passed, a really shocking milestone when even the official homeless figures increased to over 10,000 people. Father McFerry says, in reality, you talk about people who are sofa surfing and moving between homes and living in relatives' homes and so on. We could be talking, in fact, about 15,000 people. It is a terrible legacy, Minister, for you, as this government perhaps approaches towards its final months. But unfortunately, it's a sadly deserved legacy for you after your years of inaction, the snail-like pace of delivery, and all your misaligned priorities. And even this morning, you were saying that we need more landlords. But is it more landlords to pay rent subsidies, of up to $1 billion a year, and to keep tenants in insecure accommodation, as your Taoiseach keeps referring to when he talks about social housing? He's talking about, as Fingal County Council likes to say as well, about housing solutions. But housing solutions are usually not forever homes. They don't give stability and comfort to families. And what we need, Minister, of course, and it won't happen while Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, while you're running this country together, what we need is a large-scale local authority build of public housing with mixed tenure, providing homes for the majority of the people in Ireland. And by the way, we did have that system in the past. One of the astonishing things is that, if you go back maybe 20 or 30 years, we had a lot less landlords, and we also had lower housing lists, and far lower amount of people in homeless accommodation, far lower amount of people on the streets. And that's why I say that you're describing a fantastic world to us, and a world that simply doesn't exist. And I think, as Deputy Boyd Barrett said this morning, it's a shameful situation, Minister. I was also struck by your comments when you said that there will always be homeless people, as you said, and I quote, unable to find shelter on a given night. And that's a shocking admission by but it's your job to make sure there are enough places. And that people are not on the street. We walk outside this gate tonight that we won't be walking past 3 or 4 people in distress on the streets. That's your job, and it's a job you haven't been doing. And I think there clearly will always be homeless citizens and families while you remain in power, and you're now entering your 9th year of this miserable austerity government. The fundamental reason, again, is your active encouragement and protection of a ruthless landlord class. And we know from recent FOI and other information that's come to hand, the relentless meetings between your former Minister for Finance, Deputy Noonan, who is the Chief Operations Officer of the austerity programme, and the constant interaction with foreign property investors, so-called investors, with the vultures funds. So I want to warmly commend Deputy O'Brien tonight and the Sinn Féin party, because I think at long last he's trying to move the scales back towards a much fairer housing market. The bill, of course, is intended to complement a suite of other measures to prevent family homelessness. And, of course, it's also the amendment which that excellent frontline organisation, Focus Ireland, has been calling for a number of years now, and it's a restatement, of course, of Sinn Féin's 2016 bill, I think, which was defeated by the coalition partners, by Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. This short, of course, an important bill. It's an amendment to the 2004 Residential Tenancies Act, which will prevent tenants in buy-to-let properties being evicted when the property is properties being sold, and it inserts, of course, the new Section 34A into the 2004 Act, which will restrict the termination of tenancies of buy-to-let dwellings and applies specifically to investment mortgages. And the definition, I think, of investment mortgages is to ensure that accidental landlords are not included in the restriction only when the mortgage is taken out on a residential property that wasn't intended to serve as the principal private residence of the person. So I agree totally with Deputy O'Brien that it may be a small, but it's a very important measure to try and move back towards a housing market that will be of for service for people, young people, for families, for citizens desperately trying to seek housing. And of course, Threshold and Focus Ireland, other frontline organisations, they have provided definitive evidence to show that a majority of those entering family homelessness, they are coming from the private rental sector as a result of vacant possession notices to quit. And indeed, that's my experience. I'm sure it's your experience as Cancorla. All the families, individuals, so many of them I've represented over the past number of years, that's been their experience. And then, of course, they go on to be left maybe for up to 2.5 or even 3 years in hotel rooms, in B&Bs or in guest houses. Of course, on the 14th of February, earlier this year, I brought forward a motion on homelessness, which is co-signed by my independent colleagues in the Independence for Change Technical Group. And of course, again, we tried to urge the Minister to declare a housing emergency, to embark on a widespread state-led housing programme to dramatically increase supply, rather than, because we know, in fact, from your own figures, you're not going to achieve the Rebuilding Ireland targets. You'll be long gone from government when we're still striving, in fact, to rebuild those targets. And we also, of course, want a commitment to rehouse families who've been in emergency housing accommodation, including hubs, for 18 months and more. And I note, by the way, from my colleague, Councillor John Lyons' questions to Dublin City Council, that in fact families are staying now. They've been in hubs as long as the hubs have been established. And in fact, even when the housing voluntary bodies gave a commitment that families would be only 3 or 4 months in hubs, some of those same families are now 12 and 15 months. And of course, in the earlier emergency accommodation, we find people going way over 2.5 years. So you're right, Minister, to say, on one thing, it is very distressing, and it's particularly distressing for the families and children who are in this situation tonight, and who have, where we've reached this deplorable milestone. The Simon communities, of course, have been producing the Locked Out of the Market report regularly to update us on how few properties are available at certain points in time to those in receipt of housing assistance, such as HAP or rent supplement. And that we may have spent 700 million heading for $1 billion expenditure on HAP, but the annoying thing, again, week in, week out, when we meet people, is that people who are homeless or going from one house to the other of relatives or friends, they just can't get a HAP. We still have that situation, certainly in the Dublin region. And you mentioned, of course, about property companies, foreign companies, and so on and so forth. But again, Deputy Boyd Barrett also referred this morning to, I think, to Irish Right, the Irish Residential Properties Real Estate Investment Trust. And I note, they have a massive property portfolio, Minister, bigger than most housing bodies, bigger than most county councils, now approaching 3,000 units. And of course, they rewarded their chief executive with our basic remuneration package, Cancorla, of €680,000, also with something like €2 million in the future in shares. So we've had a relentless programme. I think the Financial Times reported yesterday on what it called the impending buy-to-let boom, and said they're a model. That's a model which transform rental housing into an investable asset class. And this type of investment, of course, is spreading across Europe, because the rental yield in many European countries is significantly higher than what most of the bond market can offer. And of course, our own country is often highlighted as being a particularly attractive proposition for the kind of companies who want to go into that area. So, Minister, we do need, of course, increased supply of good quality rented accommodation, but it should have been linked to affordable and stable rents. And at this side of the House, we came forward before, again and again, with proposals to freeze rents for 2 or 3 years, to give us a chance to get some kind of a programme, even Rebuilding Ireland, properly up and running. As I said, the bill before us, it's a modest attempt to begin dealing with one of the most awful aspects of Irish rental law. I think the Minister's defence of the existing situation, again, it's based on a fantasy. It's untenable. We have so many other countries in Europe, and we've seen it in reports like the FANSA report for European Union countries, that we could have a different system, we could have a much fairer rental market, but I don't think we're ever going to have that, Corla, while Fine Gael is in power. And we have to remember, of course, the background to this is that a lot of the people we're talking about here tonight, those ruthless landlords ever pushing up rents, they got all those tax breaks before the 2014 period, and in this very budget, of course, you gave them the 100% tax break. So I think the reality is the ideological party in this is Fine Gael, is yourselves, and it's a hopeless situation while you remain in power.
Now, Deputy Ruth Coppinger, please.